Barnes & Noble Union Square, please give a warm welcome to #1 New York Times best-selling author Joe Hill and Port Over co-host Jenna Seery.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today for this live taping of the Poured Over podcast and for a conversation with Joe Hill. So I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and co-host of Poured Over, and I think you all know Joe Hill. He is the author of books that I know you love, like Nosferatu, The Fireman, Horns, Heart-Shaped Box, more, and more. But today, I know you're all excited to talk about King Sorrow. Who here has read it already? Anybody finished it? Okay, a couple.
Wow.
All right. Well, I think we're going to start with Joe doing a little reading and talking about where the book started for him.
I did think I would give you a little taste of the book to see what you're getting into. Maybe I should preface it, though, by saying something about the reading and the event itself. I did my first one of these readings in 2007 for my first novel, Heart-Shaped Box. And I had not done a lot of public speaking before. And there was a big hometown crowd at Water Street Books for the opening night kickoff. And I was pretty nervous, dry mouth and, racing heart and stuff. And I had to get up there and read in front of everyone. And the language in Heart-Shaped Box is pretty salty. And like the scene that I was going to read, in it you have a couple. One is a fella named Judas Coyne, who's a heavy metal musician in his 60s on the downslope of his career. And he's living in his mansion in upstate New York with his much younger groupie girlfriend. And they're not getting along too well. And they're having a conversation in the scene I was going to read, and I'm looking at it, and I look out at the crowd. It's like 8 p.m. in New Hampshire, and it's all grown-ups and stuff. And I thought, I'm just going to read it the way I wrote it, and go for it. So they're talking, and she says, "You're a sympathetic son of a bitch, you know that?" And he says, "You want sympathy? Go fuck James Taylor." As soon as I read that, like 8 little kids cropped up in the crowd. Like mushrooms after a rain, and the kids were all like, and their parents were all like, but anyway, since then, these readings and events have been PG-13, R-rated, and my point is, if you brought your children along, I can't be on the hook for your bad parenting. Let me set up the little section that I'm going to read here. So King Sorrow begins in 1989, and we have 6 friends who are all at a small liberal arts college on the coast of Maine. And they've bonded over a shared love of the occult. What they really like to do on a weekend is get together and roll a couple numbers and mess around with a Ouija board or test each other for psychic powers. And it's how they goof off on the weekend. And one of them finds himself in terrible trouble and is being blackmailed by some local scumbags. And being forced to steal rare and expensive books from the special collection of the college library, to which he has unique access. And it's a desperate position to find himself in. And one weekend, him and his friends get pretty high. They begin screwing around with a ritual and wind up bringing a dragon through into our reality to defend themselves from their enemies. And this dragon immediately begins to go to work on these 2 malevolent local drug dealers, Jane Niswander and her boyfriend, Ronnie Volpe. And the 2 of them live in the small town of Goguen, and Jane lives with her little sister who's 18 and pregnant. And the only other thing I'd mention is that it takes time for the dragon, King Sorrow, to come through into our world. And he starts small and gets bigger and bigger. He starts as small as an evil thought, but by the time he's ready to crack our reality like an eggshell and enter our world, he's as big as a 747, almost. Anyway, he has begun to forewarn Jane that something bad is coming. He's begun to haunt her, and that's the scene we're in here. Okay. Jane sits up in bed, heart beating too fast, beating like after a blast of cheap, shitty cocaine. There's someone in the house, someone moving around. There's no way to tell what time it is. The digital clock by the bedside blinks 12 o'clock. It's been blinking 12 o'clock for days. Neither of them has bothered to reset it. The door lolls open a crack. A ghost-colored light flickers in the hall. At the bottom of the doorway, Jane can see a black shadow. As she watches, it shifts, moves, and disappears, as if someone had been standing there and is only now backing away. "Donna?" Jane whispers. "You up?" Ronnie sleeps on his stomach, the bedsheets kicked back. He wears white Fruit of the Loom, so old they've assumed a certain transparency, his ass visible through the old fabric, and his face is half buried in his blood-stained pillow. He gets nosebleeds after too much coke and uses the pillowcase to wipe. She wants to club him one, wake him up, but he usually hits back, and she's not in the mood for a punch-up tonight. The TV is running. That's what's casting the spectral blue light glimmering in the hallway. She can hear Sports Center. Then there's a snapping sound and a hiss of static. A moment passes, and there's another snap, and Jane can hear MTV, Headbangers Ball, Ozzy Osbourne pouring himself a suicide solution. Tana. Has to be Tana. She can't sleep either. Still, when she slips out of bed, she reaches for the shotgun leaning against the wall beside the end table. It's a single barrel Ithaca pump, and it was her daddy's gun. It's older than Tana, a Slamfire model. They literally don't make them like this anymore. Hold the trigger down, and the Ithaca will fire as fast as you can pump shells into the chamber. It's not quite an automatic weapon, but it's perfectly possible to squeeze off 4 rounds in 4 seconds. She nudges the bedroom door open with the barrel of the gun and considers the short corridor to the living room. Tana's bedroom door is ajar on the left. The door to the bathroom stands open on the right, looking into maximum darkness. Jane creeps sidelong down the hall and peers through the open crack of Tana's bedroom door. The sight sends a paralytic tingle of alarm through her. It can't be Tana in the living room because Tana is right there, asleep on her side, one hand cupping the swollen curve of her belly, and a copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting on the bed beside her. She snores delicately, her hair across her face. In the living room, the TV clunks to a new channel. The TV is 10 years old, and when someone changes the channel, it sounds like slamming a fresh magazine into a gun. The studio audience roars with unhinged laughter. "Who's there?" she cries. Without waiting for an answer, she shouts, "I have a gun!" The audience laughs and laughs as if that was the funniest thing ever. Tana makes a small muttering sound in her bedroom and then says Jane's name, but she isn't all the way awake, Jane can tell from her tone. She moves, has to move, can't be still any longer. She ducks into the living room, lifting the Ithaca, swinging the barrel to cover the couch. As she does, the TV turns itself off with another loud clunk. Light collapses to a dot in the center of the screen. In its fading glow, Jane can see the remote on the armrest of the couch. It is not a large living room, and there is nowhere to hide. She can see in a glance she's alone. The empty sofa, angled to face the TV, takes up most of the space. She wheels toward the front door. A black overcoat hanging from a peg looks like a man slouching against the wall, and for a microsecond, Jane is this close to emptying a barrel under Ronnie's favorite duster. Then she realizes she's moved too far into the living room and has her back to the open archway of the kitchen. She pivots on her heel to cover the tiny kitchen and sees a white, gaping corpse face staring at her through the window over the sink. She catches herself before she can blast away, realizes she's been tricked by her own reflection in the glass. Jane's hands are shaking as she revolves to face the living room once again, and now, for the first time, she can dimly see an image of something squirming across the television screen. Jane hits the wall switch and lights the room up. The TV screen has become a glass window looking into a dry aquarium, and there's a fucking snake stuffed in there. A snake as thick as a fire hose, knotted and tangled on itself. It shifts and twists slowly. Hardly enough room inside the boxy old TV for it. That's an anaconda, she thinks. There's a fucking South American anaconda in the TV. And then she sees it has arms. Scaly arms and black talons, and one of those claws draws 3 white scratches across the inside of the glass with a faint, almost musical whine. Its face presses to the glass, staring out at her with one golden eye, the pupil a vertical black slit. "Who says there's nothing on the telly this hour of the night?" remarks the thing inside the television, in a voice that reminds her of the sailor in Jaws. What was his name? Quint? "You never know when you might find a good creature feature, babe. Even better than that, Janie. Sometimes in the wee hours, a creature feature finds you." A black forked tongue flickers from the dragon's thin-lipped mouth, and that one staring eye closes in a slow wink. Jane screams. She has never screamed so loudly in her entire life. And even so, she can barely hear herself over the thunderous boom of the shotgun. Her hands are shaking, but the shot is true. The curved screen of her 10-year-old TV erupts. The back of the TV explodes outward, blowing capacitors and diodes straight through the wall. She advances on the television, coming around the sofa. She racks another shell into the pipe, and because she's still depressing the trigger, the Ithaca booms again, this time punching a hole in the floor of the television. The sudden detonation scares her so badly she takes a stumbling step backward. Her calves strike the couch and she abruptly sits down. Through the droning in her ears, she hears her sister screaming and Ronnie falling out of bed. Jane stares at the smoking wreck of her TV, looking for the black ruin of the snake, the thing that spoke to her. But he's gone now, which should be a relief. But she's fighting for breath, and there's a terrible thought cycling through her head, a paranoid chant. The worst thought of her life. He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name. I'd like to tell you it turns out okay for Jane, but there's quite a bit of the book left, which suggests that it actually doesn't. I finished the book in 2022, and in the spring of 2022, and then in the fall of 2022, I was invited to do a reading at a small library in Center Level, Maine, and right around this time of the year. And it was a beautiful day. They had the reading outside. I did my talk up in the bandstand, a couple hundred people there. And, I was reading. I thought, I'm going to read from the new book. It's tempting to read the old stuff, because it's safe. But I thought, no, I'm going to have some balls. I'm going to read the new material. And I thought, I'm going to read this scene. This scene is killer. It's really going to get him. And I read it just as it is, and I had him right here. I had him right in the palm of my hand. And then I got to this bit, and I read, "The back of the TV explodes outward, blowing capacitors and dildos straight through the wall." I couldn't get him back. It was, that was it. I mean, like, any hope of giving him a little bit of a chill evaporated right in front of me.
Is that why it took 3 more years for the book?
It was the overcoming the trauma,
Okay.
Was really, what slowed things down, yeah. But anyway, we had some fun anyway.
I love that. thank you so much for giving us that little taste because, like you said, there's quite a few pages in this book, and there's so much that readers will find, that they will be afraid of, that they will have some pretty strong emotions about. And don't worry if you haven't read it, because I promise not to spoil too much. I can't make any promises for Joe, though. But
well, it's a big thick book, but also, don't be intimidated by the size. I mean, my job is to make it not feel like your homework. And also, I do a lot of stuff that, like, chapters that have like 2 paragraphs in them and stuff like that, which takes up a lot of real estate, but isn't really, makes the book feel a lot lighter and zippier. Yeah.
No, I think that you fly through because the characters in this book are really, I mean, the plot is incredible and you're going to never know what's happening until it's too late. But the characters helped me just fly through this because I felt like I was talking to friends and then sometimes enemies and then friends again.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear a little bit about, how this story maybe started, but also how these characters found their way into the book.
It's funny you should talk about them as the friends. The story it doesn't have one origin, it has many. But one thing is, the first 200 pages is very much in the mode of dark academia. And the roots of dark academia largely lie in a book that was published in 1990 by Donna Tartt called The Secret History, which is about 6 friends who meet in a liberal arts college and do something terrible and then have to deal with the fallout for the rest of their lives. Sound familiar? The thing about Donna Tartt, though, is like she's way up here. I can't actually write at that level. I wish I could, but I don't have that kind of ability. And so I might have been a little bit influenced by The Secret History, but I think by the time I was about 100 pages in, I was thinking more about Friends. I began to see the whole book as like a bonus season of Friends, but done as horror instead of comedy. Like if Monica Geller was bitten in 2 in episode 6. So, and I like to write dialogue. I like to write, I think I'm pretty good at writing banter, and I had fun bringing these characters together and seeing how they played off each other. And the book does skip through time like a stone across a lake. So it begins in 1989, then we get to 1995, 2000, 2005, jumping forward through time. And each time we make another jump, the lead character of the next portion of story is a different one of the friends. And they each get to be the hero at some point in the tale. And that also felt like, almost less like I was writing one big book and more like I was writing 4 or 5 brief, punchy books that all fit under one roof.
The one where the friends summon a demon.
Yeah, the one where friends summon a dragon.
Yeah, I love it. My personal favorite character, I have to say for everyone so you can have that in your mind, is Allie. I think.
Yeah, Allison Shiner.
Yeah, I just love the way that she looks at the world. I love the growth, the arc she goes on, the journey she has. But I think there are so many great interactions. And like you said, the dialogue between them, the banter is so fun. Did you have a favorite moment as you were writing?
So I packed a lot of story into the thing. You've got an air disaster thriller with a 747 at 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean during a thunderstorm while a dragon fights F-16s outside the window. There's an Indiana Jones-style plunge into a troll's trap-filled cave. There's a desperate attempt to rescue survivors from a building collapse. There's a drunken brawl on roller skates. Tolstoy packed a lot into his books, but he missed the drunken brawl on roller skates, to which I say, amateur. And Allison is the star of that sort of air disaster thriller, and that was probably, I knew that was something I was writing towards when I was only about 30 pages into the book, and that was something I knew that would be a banger of a sequence, so I was pretty excited for that. Every one of the characters is at a different place on the political spectrum. And that was important to me because I wanted to show a whole cross-section of America. So you have one person who's really far right and just adores Rush Limbaugh, and one person who's really far left. Amusingly, they're brother and sister. The one who's really far left wrote in Willie Nelson for president all the way back in 1990 or something, and then you have someone who's sort of more center right, which is Allison, who is the daughter of a Texas congressman, and she's very mainstream. Her Christianity is very important to her. She's also pretty privileged. At one point in the book, she thinks, if I lose this job, I'll have nothing left except the shirt on my back and my $16 million trust fund. And the house in Cape Cod. And the house in Dallas. There's Arthur Oakes, who was the lead character, the first chunk of the book, who I would describe as sort of center left. And then you've got Colin Wren, who is sort of a tech bro libertarian, and then finally there's Gwen Underfoot, who is the only one among them who's not going to the college. Gwen is actually a townie whose mother is Colin's housekeeper. And I think probably Gwen's view of politics is no matter who you vote for, you always get the government. And probably she's mostly tuned into local elections because she kind of knows the players, but otherwise is somewhat indifferent. And I also tried, I have my own political views and my own position, but I tried to be understanding and fair, even to people whose maybe views I deeply disagree with. I tried to find why they believe what they believe and how that shaped them as a person and how their experiences shape their political views and philosophical outlook, and tried to find what was best in each of those characters. So even the most terrible of them I enjoyed spending time with.
Absolutely. And I will say, if you submitted Eventbrite questions or wrote down a question, I have a selection of them here. I'm going to read them out. Some of them had names and some didn't. Do your characters ever surprise you as you write? And how does that factor into your writing process and the way that the book comes out?
Oh, my characters shock me all the time. I did New York Comic Con and had a chance to talk to George R.R. Martin. And one of the things George R.R. Martin said is, he said, there's two kinds of writers. There's architects and there's gardeners. And I instantly knew what he was talking about, and I'm a gardener, and I think sometimes the example I use throws back to my first novel. So when I started writing Heart-Shaped Box, I thought it would be a short story, not a novel. You have this guy, this angry, resentful prick of a human being, Judas Coyne, rambling around in his upstate New York mansion. And the only thing he has which gives him pleasure is his collection of arcane artifacts. So he has a witch's confession and a tree-panned human skull and a snuff movie. And he hears about a woman selling a suit online that she says is haunted. And he decides he wants it for his collection. If you've ever seen even a single horror movie, you know this is a terrible fucking idea. But he buys it, and it turns out the ghost is very real and very dangerous. And when I started the story, it was called Dead Man's Suit. And I thought it would just be 30 pages long, and the ghost would eat him for breakfast on page 30, and I'd get paid like $75 by a British fantasy magazine for it. But then a funny thing happened on the way to the ending, which is Jude turned out to have a cockroach-like ability to survive. Every time I stomped on him, I'd pick my shoe up again and he'd scuttle away. And it became kind of fascinating to see how many times I could step on him and he could keep going. And it turned out he could keep going for 300 pages. But the reason for his survival is he kept making choices I never would have made. He kept fighting his way out of the corner by doing things I couldn't possibly have anticipated. And it's tempting. I think authors tend to say, my characters are all versions of me. They all came out from inside me. But that's not really true of my work. And I think that leaves out the possibility of observation, that you can see people who are very different than you and then accurately render them. And so he was a certain type of successful musician who had lived through the 70s and 80s, and I'd read a lot about in Rolling Stone, and I felt like I could evoke him, but he's not like me. And that's all the pleasure of writing, as far as I'm concerned, is finding a very specific character who's fun to spend time with, and then, putting them in an outrageous situation and seeing what they do.
And I think that allows in your work for you to really play in the balance of horror and comedy and love story and all of these different things, because these characters exist in this space in between all of it. And I know you've talked about this before, and it's something I firmly believe, is that horror and comedy are like this two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely.
And in this book, there are so many moments where I didn't know if I was scared or laughing or both. And I think that that's the dream for a lot of us as readers.
I had a chance to have lunch with today with Mathias Clasen, a Dutch literary theorist, who's written beautifully on the subject of horror. His book, How Horror Seduces, is the best nonfiction work on the genre to come along in 40 years. And he's written some brilliant stuff. He's most famous for having co-written a piece that showed that fans of horror dealt with pandemic lockdown better than emotionally and psychologically. They dealt with it better than people who don't like horror, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, most horror fans already have their plan for when Captain Trips hits, And so one of the things that Mathias said to me over lunch, we were talking about his research, and he said, the interesting thing about jump scares in movies is that almost always people scream, then they laugh. Mm-hmm. Those two uncontrollable vocalizations are tied right together. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. But the other thing is, I, as a young writer, I asked myself over and over, why do people keep reading? And that question has not left my mind in the decades since. It's become more important because there are so many reasons not to read this book. You could scroll TikTok, you could scroll Twitter, you could scroll through the options on Netflix. Your opportunities to doom scroll, are all around you. Why? What keeps a person reading? And what I settled on is peril. And especially in the early books, there's a lot of elaborate big set pieces of exploring physical peril. And I love that kind of thing. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten interested in other kinds of peril, like moral peril and romantic peril. Romantic perils that, the whole backbone of the publishing industry is romance. That's the bread and butter. That's what really sells. And romance is always about, is she going to marry this shithead, or is she going to go with the right guy? It's that thing that Willie Nelson says, country music will be popular as long as 80% of the people on the planet aren't with their first choice. I love that. But then the other thing that keeps people reading is if they're laughing. Mm-hmm. So if I can't scare you, I'll try to make you laugh.
And often you will do both. I think there are several moments that I can't really explicitly say here because I want you to experience them for yourself, where I sat with my mouth open and then laughed and then had to close the book for 5 minutes and then reopened the book and immediately had to know what was happening next, but I needed a little breather. But I think also something in this book that really falls into that of why we keep reading and why we use books to process, why we use books to escape, and sometimes at the same time. And a question again from Eventbrite here on the same thought. Timothy, if you're here.
Tim, are you here? Timothy? I have an agent planted in the crowd. So Tim, thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming out today, and a great question. Let's hear it.
Is balancing supernatural horror with real world horror, and finding in this book that there are things that feel fantastical because they are, but sometimes the most fantastical feeling is what we are actually faced with.
Yeah. The really short answer to that is dragons are scary, but they have nothing on people.
Right.
So, yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah,
Thank you, Timothy. I, piggybacking off of both dragons and the horrors of real life, I love the concept of evil sowing evil. And can you do good by doing bad?
There's so the kicker in part 1, they have essentially arranged with King Sorrow for King Sorrow to destroy Jane Nicewander. But what they don't realize after they make this deal with King Sorrow is that their pet dragon is in their lives to stay, and that they have to find a fresh sacrifice every single year, or he'll take one of them. And aiming King Sorrow at someone isn't like, aiming a sniper rifle at them. King Sorrow's hobby is burning villages. So there's always a lot of collateral damage. In fact, if I could, just as an aside, I've thought a lot about why we love dragons. And I figured out it's because they remind us of our cats, right? Because dragons, like our cats, dragons are proud, sly, lazy, and delight in recreational acts of homicide. So anyone who's owned a cat has experienced the unique pleasure of walking into your bedroom and finding the decapitated head of a mouse set in the middle of your pillow like a little mint in a fancy hotel. So that's the deal with King Sorrow, and hopefully you answered the question because I can't remember what it was. What were we asking? What was the question?
Well, we were talking about, can you do good by doing bad?
Right. The book is built around this moral question, which is there, how, at one point, one of the characters, Colin, says to Arthur, "What do you know about Biafra?" And Arthur says, "Oh, I think I know where you're going with this." And Colin says, "So in the 1970s, the CIA financed a civil war in Biafra to keep prices low at the pump. But no one thinks about that when they fill up the tank. No one thinks, 10,000 people died so that we can keep unleaded at an affordable price." And Colin says, there's a red backdrop to American life that we don't think about. It's the cost of our security and our relative, wealth. And, we have already, never mind King Sorrow, we have already accepted a contract where a certain number of people are going to die every year, so we can be happy. Of all the 6 friends, Colin is the one who is most at peace with the idea that they have to pick someone every year. All they have to do is pick someone really terrible, and they can feel that they're acting in good conscience. And the book explores whether that's really possible. Is there any blowback from that kind of, finding someone who's, lived a wicked life and you take them out with a dragon? Could there be any repercussions? It turns out there can be. Spoiler.
Yeah, I think that's I found myself so many times as I was reading, not that I would really want to be in the lives of any of these characters, but you can't help but think, what would I do here? And I think that really falls for me under reasons I read. Even the most fantastical things is always thinking, what would I do in that situation? Trying to understand, especially these characters who are often wildly different than myself and make choices I would never make. But you still think, how do they get there?
I feel that way too, but maybe we'd make worse choices.
And I have been known to.
I think that one thing about the friends, and they face tremendous peril over the course of the book. Terrible things happen to them, and they do terrible things. But they love each other a lot, and they clearly enjoy their company. And you've got 25 years of this closely knit friend group, falling in and out of love with each other, and battling with each other, and then standing up for each other and defending one another. And I think that, aside from all the dragony bits of the book, that's why we watch Friends. It's not a one-to-one comparison, by the way. There is no Bing Chandler or anything. It's not a perfect, but that idea of I think we kind of yearn for that, to have, a group of people we can tell anything and talk to anything about us, and they'll tease us, and they'll love us, and, stick up for us. You know, that in spite of what they go through, that is a sort of rewarding thing to experience, I think.
I agree. And I think part of what kept me plowing through this book as I did at breakneck speed was that they never gave up. This idea that they keep going. My own thought going through this was I would just be lay down and be done. I don't know that I could endure. But seeing the way that they do kept me so connected to them because they just continue.
But I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say the country is going through a pretty bad time right now. You know, things feel really uneasy and unwell. The culture around us feels unwell. It sometimes feels like someone injected rabies into the body politic. And now everyone is out of their minds and foaming at the mouth. And yet, think about how often you have a laugh with a friend, or you go out with, someone in your family and have a great breakfast together. You do push on even when you feel like it's all coming apart around you.
Agreed. And rabies is my biggest fear, so I have to...
The thing about rabies is apparently it kills you from fright. And I just think, boy, it doesn't get better than that, does it? When you're talking about ways to punch out, just die gibbering and screaming with your heart pounding too fast. Yeah, nice.
Could happen any day. I want to also talk a little bit about your approach to writing this book.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while since you've had a novel.
Yeah.
I imagine you had to do some degree of research and learning for some of the things in this book.
No, I mostly just bullshit.
Oh, perfect. That will give a lot of us hope. I know Alex from Eventbrite had questions about writing process, especially writing a book that turns out to be almost 900 pages. There's got to be some degree of discipline that goes into there. I'm hoping.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the thing about it has been almost 10 years between novels, but it's not like I pulled a J.D. Salinger and
No.
disappeared into a Vermont cabin to be alone.
A lot.
I had written two big chonkers back to back, Nosferatu and The Fireman, and then I thought I need to get small again. So I did a book of novellas and I did a book of short stories. I wrote a bunch of graphic novels because I have this whole other life as a comic book writer. I did some screenplays. What else did I do? Oh, I got married.
Just little things.
Yeah, I got married and we had twins. Actually, my twins are now 3 years old. So I last slept in 2022. I'm hallucinating right now. In terms of, though, the writing process and developing it, you just have to believe you're going to get to the end. And a day of work is just a day of work. I just have to show up like a plumber or something. I mean, I knew about 2018 it was time to get back to the day job, and I did. I realized at a certain point that this was going to be the first book I dedicated to my wife, and I think I wanted to impress her. And the trouble a man can get into when he decides to impress his best girl. So the book just kind of accordioned outward into this. I kept throwing more and more stuff into it until we wound up where we are. So don't blame me, blame her.
Okay, I'll write that down. Look at how much I love you. I wrote 900 pages.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love that you mentioned all the other projects you've done because, I think many people would agree here that it's a prolific body of work we're approaching here. And I know
people who are more prolific.
You do?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. My dad is like,
You don't I think he's got a promising career ahead
my
of him.
dad goes, oh, look. It's a book.
Yeah.
So.
You've got inspiration, but I think that in your own right, you've got a lot
thanks.
there. I bet there's a lot of Locke and Key fans out here because.
Thanks.
And I know I got a store question. It didn't have a name on it, but people want to know: are there going to be more comics? Are there going to be other things in the future?
More Locke and Key.
Well,
who asked that question?
It just says more comics.
It was him right there. He's going to need a whiskey tumbler when he hears this answer. No, I don't think any more Lock and Key.
Okay.
It would be great. It would be great. The company has that published Lock and Key has changed hands a number of times. I don't really know anyone over there, and and it's not clear to me that there's a huge appetite for them to go forward for complicated reasons. It's all kind of boring, inside baseball stuff. So, but the other thing is. I turned 50 a couple years ago, and when I turned 50, I stopped and I thought for the first time in my career, what do I want to do in the next 10 years? I thought, what do I want to accomplish in my 50s? And I thought, I want to try to be a book a year writer. I've never been a book a year guy. And there are all these guys that I love, obviously my dad, but also guys like Harlan Coben and Lee Child. And, I joke that John D. MacDonald wrote every single crime novel published in 1958. Seriously, if you go through the paperbacks, he must have churned out one every 2 months. I just thought it would be really great to see if I can do a book a year. And that's also why I know King Sorrow will be the last really long one for a while, because they can't all be like this if I'm going to do one a year. King Sorrow kicks it off, but the next book, Hunger, is already done and in the pipeline. I'm working on the book for 2027, so we're going to roll for a while and see how it goes.
I love that. I think people will be very thrilled.
But I can't do that and do comics. That's
Right.
to tie it all together. Something had to give, and
Yes.
it was comic books.
Where you're moving in phases. This is your novel period.
Yeah, it's my novel period.
I love that.
Right.
As you go through, do you have any of those big ideas that you've had over the years when you've been working on other things that you're like, someday I hope to get to this?
We sort of half talked about this in the green room. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. The joke is I wrote this. So after Heart-Shaped Box, I had this novella called Gunpowder that I actually wrote in 2006. And it's a pure science fiction thing set in deep space, like Star Wars or something. But this is like Lord of the Flies in space. And I think Gunpowder is pretty good. And it was published as a small press limited edition, but I wanted there to be 3 more novellas to make one connected novel that would be about these 30 kids on this sort of isolated on this planet that they have nicknamed Gunpowder. And the second novella was going to be called Slave Girls of Gunpowder, joking on a novel. Who was the guy who wrote the Gore novels? Jonathan Norman, I think, was the guy's name. But it's a joke. The girls are pretty badass. But I showed it to my editor, Jen Brell, who I should say is here tonight, and she's edited every single one of the books, and it's just absolutely amazing. She's made every single one of the books better by quite a bit, usually by crossing a lot of stuff out, which is like this again and again and again every page. I'm like, anyway. Yeah. The Jen loved Gunpowder, but she said, Joe, I don't know. The last book was a horror novel, and I don't know if people are ready to follow you into deep space. And I said, I think you're right. I'll put it aside. Every contract I have done with William Morrow in the years since has included Gunpowder as one of the books, and every time it gets bumped. I keep meaning it's been on the back burner eternally. And I was cleaning out the basement a couple months ago, and I came across the original manuscript, and I found like 100 pages of it that hasn't been published. I thought, oh my God, this is great. It's like already half done. Although actually I'll probably throw them out and just start again. But one of these days we'll have Gunpowder for sure. I will finish it sooner or later.
I can't wait. And then we move into your high fantasy, then your romance.
My romantasy.
Yes.
Well, this is kind of like.
This
is kind of like a romantasy. But here's the thing. There's 2 things. There is a fair amount of sex in this book, but mostly it's pretty unhappy sex, which I don't think is really the romantasy vibe. But also, you got to remember that I started this book in 2018 before romantasy was even a word.
Correct.
If I had known that the combination of dragons and hot sex was going to be the big seller, I would have stuck. There would have been a lot more boning in this book, And so if I have one regret, I guess it's not too late to revise for a special edition.
Yeah, we could
Yeah.
do a few extra chapters. We
Yeah.
could, there's
XX extra chapters.
Got 'em. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so glad you're all here with me for this. I wonder too, and I think some of your fans are. There was a question from Dylan about this,
Dylan here.
Dylan. And I always ask about literary influences.
Yeah.
And some books and works that helped you sort of shape who you are as a reader and a writer.
I mean, I come from a family of writers. I'm an enormous Stephen King fan. I grew up reading Stephen King. I sometimes feel like there's a few things here. I dropped that last name because I wanted to keep it a secret about my family, and I wanted to have at least some publications, to earn some publications and know that I had been published for the right reasons, that someone wasn't just publishing me because I had a famous daddy, and I managed to get that. I managed to sell a few stories, and I sold the first collection to a small press in the east of England, and I was able to build up some confidence and get some of what I need. But the thing is I loved horror fiction. I had always loved horror, and I was writing scary stories, So on the one hand, I didn't want to be known as the son of Stephen King, but on the other hand, I was writing horror. And the thing is I kind of feel like everyone who's my age and writes horror fiction is like one of Stephen King's kids, and it's not just me. So of course my dad's been a big influence, but also my mom. My mom is like the family's secret sauce. She's read all of my dad's manuscripts and commented on them. Sometimes she writes the bad reviews before the reviews come out. When he finished it, she looked at it and said, the critics are going to say you left off 2 letters. When he finished Insomnia, she said, oh, I can see the reviews already. Stephen King's Insomnia cures it. My third novel, Nosferatu, is about a road vampire named Charlie Manx, who's lived on America's back highways for 100 years, and kept himself young by draining the life force from small children. And that book, in first draft, had an ugly ending, a dark, grim, hopeless ending. And I'm like, I'm not changing a fucking word, because I'm an artist, man. I'm going to take the reader's face and I'm going to rub it in the awfulness of life. If my editor begs for a change, I'm going to be like, forget it. That's not happening. And I took the first draft and I sent it off to my mom. And my mom was my first reader. And she read it, she flew through it. She called me up a week later and she said, Joe, the book is just magnificent, but that ending simply won't do. And I said, okay, Mom. So that's how long my artistic integrity lasted through the first reader, Anyway, so yes, I would say I have a lot of, there's a lot of writers I really care about. Elmore Leonard, John D. MacDonald, learned a lot from Elmore Leonard, Larry McMurtry, but chiefly it's my parents.
Absolutely. And to wrap us up here, I have to ask the question that has really been sitting with me since I finished King Sorrow is, do you miss these characters now that the book is written? Because I do.
That's such a sweet thing to say. No. No, because, it's like, it's kind of weird. You kind of get like book amnesia. You're so close to them for so long. They're in your lives every day, and you're spending as much time talking to them as you are to the actual people in your lives. It's most of the time if you spend your day talking to the voices in your head, people feel like you need to be medicated. And this is the only career where you can spend all day talking to the voices in your head and you get paid for it. But you finish the book and, begins to go through the process of revisions and so on. And as it moves through the publishing pipeline, you keep taking steps away from it and into the next story. And by the time you get to the point where the book is actually out, you're deep into the next story and you're in this new set of relationships with this new set of characters, and so I know they mattered to me. I know I enjoyed their company, that they were terrific and everything, but they've all gotten a little hazy on me. They're back in the they're back in the mist somewhere behind me. So, but hopefully they'll live for you guys now, and you'll have some fun with it.
I was going to say, don't worry, because I think they're about to live in the heads and hearts of the readers here.
That's very kind.
So, thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming out tonight.
And thank you all for coming.
Jenna, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.